Dear guests and distinguished speakers, dear Provost Liviu Matei. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the joint online symposium, Critical Pedagogy, Romani Emancipation and Post-COVID Education, hosted together by the European Roma Institute for Arts and Culture and the Romani Studies program at the Central European University. ERIAC is a membership-based organization currently holding 148 members, bringing together Roma and non-Roma individuals and organizations with relevant and demonstrated competencies and experience in the field of arts and culture, and who are committed to ERIAC's values. ERIAC's associate membership are organized in 4 thematic sections: arts and culture, history and commemoration, research and publication, media and information, and it is through these sections that collective knowledge and input of the members is channeled to ERIAC, feeding directly into the ERIAC programming. In the beginning of 2019, ERIAC membership and management began discussing priorities in the field of knowledge production and knowledge transfer to assess the role ERIAC should play. These discussions became more dynamic in 2020 due to the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, which has disproportionately affected Romani pupils. In connection to the pandemic, the members have also reported the drastic rise in anti-Gypsyism and hate speech targeting Roma, and the wave of disinformation and misrepresentation of Roma in the media. It became clear that ERIAC needs to develop programming that facilitates access to educational resources, fills a niche in existing curricula, formal education, and at the same time provides reliable and high-quality knowledge about Roma for the benefit of both the Roma communities and the non-Roma majority. In 2020, in the framework of the current international outreach program of ERIAC, the Roma Cultural History Initiative supported by the German Federal Foreign Office, ERIAC has launched the Barvalipe Roma Online University. Developed in partnership with the RSPCEU, the Romani Studies program of the Central European University, and led by a brilliant team of Roma scholars, ERIAC board member Julius Rostás, deputy director Anna Mirga, Kruselnicka, and project coordinator Ioannida Kostake, the Roma Online University has already transformed into a flagship project of ERIAC. Barvalipe Roma Online University is an online educational platform where Roma and non-Roma can access reliable knowledge about the Roma identities, histories, and cultures through a collection of high-quality lectures delivered by leading Roma scholars. The Barvalipe Roma Online University was launched on September 1st, 2020, with its inaugural course, Introduction to Roma Cultural History. The course consists of 18 lectures delivered by renowned scholars, which are streamed weekly live on social media, followed by a discussion with leading experts in the field. Together, they comprise a complete curriculum of Roma cultural history that proposes a canon and acts as a reference for Roma cultural history. So far, the Roma Online University can be considered a successful initiative. It has very well received. It was very well received by the audience and academic community, has an average of around 10,000 reach per video lecture on Facebook and hundreds of engaged social media users. It inspires collaboration with academic institutions and Roma grassroots. ERIAC has been approached by various institutions with proposals for collaboration. Further use of the online materials is online and offline settings for both formal and non-formal education. The online university builds a digital infrastructure for knowledge production and knowledge transfer, filling a gap in research and school curricula. We look forward to developing this initiative further in upcoming years. Furthermore, inspired in its own members, ERIAC is developing other initiatives which will also build on the knowledge produced by the Barvalipe University, such as a Romani language reform initiative, or the research of Roma resistance history and developing the educational materials, rethinking Roma resistance, and as well digital library for critical Romani studies scholarship. These initiatives are also very timely We welcome the historic Council of Europe recommendation on the inclusion of the history of Roma and or travelers in school curricula and teaching materials adopted in July 2020, which clearly commands the member states to give space to Roma identity and history in formal education. ERIAC as an entity closely connected to the Council of Europe through the Memorandum of Understanding and through Council of Europe's role in the ERIAC board, has hoped that the materials and experiences of ERIAC and its membership community will serve as a reference for Council of Europe member states. Today's online symposium seeks to create a platform to imagine and discuss post-COVID educational systems and for knowledge production that are committed to and deliver social justice. By providing a space for discussion between intergovernmental organizations, Roma civil society, and Roma and non-Roma academics, we will reflect together on best ways to tackle current challenges. We hope that insights we will share today will allow us to produce policy recommendations for key institutions promoting Roma education and represent a first step in building an alliance of stakeholders committed to educational programs and initiatives that promote the emancipation of Romani people. Thank you. And dear Provost Liviu Matei, I invite you to the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Timea. Good afternoon, everyone. It is still a little bit strange to talk to the screen after all these months, but it is good that we can meet at least in this format, and I hope that everybody is reasonably well. It was very interesting to listen to Timea's introduction. Some things I didn't know about. I didn't know that Barvalipe has developed as an online university. That is very interesting. So, you know, I'm looking forward to learn more from the discussion today. I would also like to welcome all of you to this online symposium. And I would like to share perhaps two thoughts from the perspective of CEU and from the perspective of someone like me, a university administrator who is interested in broader issues of higher education policy and also in how higher education can contribute to the emancipation of marginalized, discriminated against groups like the Romani population. So these two thoughts are the following. For the first one, we are at the time of pandemic, right? We are discussing about post-COVID, and that's very good, but we are in the middle of it. So we hope we will be out of the crisis soon, but we are not yet out. So what is happening now? This pandemic has brought about a situation of crisis everywhere and in basically all dimensions of economic, social, cultural life. There is a crisis in higher education as well. I mean, higher education, the fact that the higher education is in a crisis is not new. You know, there is a lot of talk in the recent history of higher education about crisis or crisis in the plural. And if one reads, as I have tried to recently, what has been written about the crisis of higher education, you end up with the conclusion that higher education has been in a permanent crisis, at least since the beginning of the massification after the Second World War. Crisis of funding, crisis of management, crisis of pedagogy, you know, the crisis, economic crisis, the depression, the recession, and so on. So there is a lot of talk about crisis in higher education, and sometimes this talk is only talk. There is no real crisis. You know, there is, for example, a talk about the crisis of liberal arts model in higher education, and one can discuss whether that is really a crisis like the end of liberal education or not. But what is clear about COVID is that this is a crisis. There's no doubt that this is a real crisis in higher education. But what is interesting is that having a little bit of a historical perspective on crisis in higher education, what they do when they are real is that they tend to focus the attention on particular issues, matters, which are most urgent in that situation. That's normal, right? So universities don't know whether they can have students now, whether they can have the funding to operate next year if they are relying on tuition. So what is happening both inside universities and outside universities in higher education policy is that we tend to focus on very immediate, urgent issues and forget about what I would call the pre-existing conditions of higher education. So there are very important issues that we tend to neglect in a time of crisis or forget about, in part because we have to focus on more important issues. And let me just give you one example, perhaps before I come closer to the issue of this seminar. There is a crisis of academic freedom in Europe. Nobody is talking about it now, even after the decision of European Court of Justice in the Lex EU case. Well, that sounds like a luxury to talk about academic freedom when students don't know whether they can go to classes, professors don't know whether they will have a job next year. But this is important, and we should not forget. And there are other similar issues, preconditions of higher education, if I can stretch a little bit, or pre-existing conditions of higher education, if I can stretch a little bit this medical metaphor. And one of them has to do with access. Right? So, this is not a new issue. And as Timea said, the pandemic exacerbates the issues of access or restriction of access, for example, for the Romani population. And it is very important not to forget about this. So when we think about post-COVID education, we should think about pre-COVID situation as well. And what are those continuing remaining challenges or problems or catastrophes sometimes that we have. So in that regard, I think it is very useful that the organizers propose this topic about critical pedagogy, Romani and emancipation and post-COVID education, because there is not much discussion about Romani education, let alone emancipation through education during this time of pandemics. And there is almost no discussion about critical pedagogy. So, and that is in a way due to the pandemic, but it's also something that existed before. We at CEU think of ourselves as how should I say, one of the most important central institutions, universities, when it comes to Roma education. We never talk about critical pedagogy, except very few people, and I believe they are all on this call who are from CEU. So this is, no, we never had a discussion about CEU, about critical pedagogy for the university as a whole, or about how critical pedagogy matters or should matter in the area of Romani education. So I think that is very, very timely, very interesting topic, and I don't know whether COVID is a good opportunity to bring back at the top of the agenda this issue, or is just one of those occasions when we should not forget about important topics that we need to discuss anyway. So I'm not going to say anything about critical pedagogy because I don't know anything about that myself, and I'm looking forward to learn a little bit from this discussion.
Thank you very much, Provost Liviu Matei. And after this introduction by the host, Central European University and the European Roma Institute for Arts and Culture, I invite the first panel of this conference, and also inspire a real debate and a real contemplation over the challenges of the future of our education. Anna, please.
Thank you very much. In my capacity as the chairwoman of this first panel, I would like to kindly ask the speakers of this panel, Mr. Thorsten Afflerbach, Mr. Gyula Cserei, Mr. Recep Ali Chupi, and Ms. Gilda Horvat to turn on your cameras, please, and your microphones. And as soon as I see all of you here, we will be ready to start our panel. Wonderful. And Thorsten, Mr. Thorsten Afflerbach, if you could also turn on your camera, please, and your microphone. Excellent. So without further ado, I'm really pleased to open the first panel of this symposium, Institutional Perspective, Transformative Education, Social Justice, and the Roma in the Post-COVID Reality. In this session, we would like to focus on discussing the role which institutions, intergovernmental, but also Roma civil society organizations can and should play in ensuring that educational initiatives as well as formal educational systems are committed to delivering social justice. I think Provost Livi Matei and Tima Junghaus have quite brilliantly highlighted the gravity of the situation we're facing now. But there are also positive developments. The Council of Europe just recently, as mentioned by Tima, just recently has approved the historic recommendation on education and Roma, and also the European Union committed to 10 more years of framework of Roma inclusion, equality, and participation. So I'm really pleased to have very excellent speakers in the panel today. First, I would like to ask Mr. Thorsten Afflerbach, Head of Division of Roma and Travelers Team at the Council of Europe, to make his remarks. Thorsten, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Anna, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
Yes, good. Dear Timea, dear Livio, dear participants, it's a great pleasure for me to address you at this symposium, representing Snezana Markovic, the Director General for Democracy of the Council of Europe, because both European education policies as well as Roma inclusion policies fall under her responsibility. And she is also a member of the area board representing the Council of Europe there. Ladies and gentlemen, in times of rising nationalism, populism, history distortion, and Holocaust denial, history education that encourages multi-perspectivity and critical thinking is key to promoting dialogue, understanding, democracy, and peace. The Council of Europe can look back on several decades of activities on history education, including Holocaust remembrance, and on Roma inclusion. In the short time available today, I cannot present them all, so I shall focus on two new initiatives now. Let me start with the most recent one. On the 12th of November, only a few days after the 130th session of the ministerial meeting in Athens, the Committee of Ministers under the Greek chairmanship launched the so-called Observatory on History Teaching in Europe. This observatory aims to promote practices encouraging history teaching and learning in order to strengthen and promote the values of the Council of Europe. To that end, this observatory will collect, process, and make available information on the ways in which history is taught. It will organize events and conferences to exchange good practices. It will also serve as a platform for development and networking of European professional associations. The observatory is initially an initiative of the French government. Currently, 17 Council of Europe member states are participating in this activity, and we very much hope that more governments will soon join. The second point I want to present to you today is the new Council of Europe instrument. Timea has already mentioned it in her introduction. The recommendation of the Committee of Ministers to Member States on the inclusion of the history of Roma and travelers in school curricula and teaching materials, which was adopted by the Committee of Ministers on the 1st of July, 2020. The recommendation calls for countering persistent anti-Gypsyism by offering a balanced and contextualized teaching of Roma and or travelers' history, reflecting both their national presence and historical context and their common history as people present in Europe for centuries. Including the history of Roma and or travelers in school curricula would improve the understanding that they form an integral part of society and of the common European history and cultural heritage. All 47 member states are called upon to include the history of Roma and or travelers in school curricula and teaching materials as an effective tool to combat ignorance, prejudice, discrimination, hatred, and Holocaust denial. The recommendation indeed emphasizes the importance of teaching the Roma Holocaust as perpetrated by the Nazi regime and its allies and other acts committed against Roma and travelers across Europe. It calls on governments to integrate activities related to the remembrance of the Roma Holocaust into formal and into non-formal education in connection with the European Roma Holocaust Memorial Day on the 2nd of August, or in connection with a date specifically adapted to their historical context. Negative historical periods should be complemented by teaching historical episodes when Roma and or travelers were not victims. For example, teaching should refer to positive narratives, such as their contribution to the local, national, and European cultural heritage, the contribution to national economies, such as trade or metalwork or handicrafts, and also their role in anti-Nazi and anti-fascist resistance. I do not want to hide from you that we have been asked several times whether such a recommendation was really needed, and if so, why? Well, we have always said yes. Our approach is based on very solid research and thorough preparations. A group of specialists from the Council of Europe Ad Hoc Committee of Experts on Roma and Traveler Issues, CAROM, carried out a thematic visit in November 2017 in Košice, the Slovak Republic, and research was carried out in cooperation with the with the Roma Education Fund and the Georg Eckert Institute for International Textbook Research. Both looked at the representation of Roma in curricula and textbooks and secondary education level in 21 Council of Europe member states and in Kosovo. And the research revealed that first, the representation of Roma can be seen as largely insufficient, often stereotypical, and sometimes inaccurate. Secondly, Roma are represented mostly as a historical topic, as victims, and frequently as both. Thirdly, textbooks rarely describe contemporary Roma communities or present or individuals with names or biographical information or achievements of contemporary individuals. Fourthly, the majority of references to Roma present them as a national or ethnic minority, as a separate group within society, often as a numerical part or as a percentage of society. And finally, there's almost no representation of Roma as an integral part of the respective national society, and no description of Roma history, culture, or their contribution to society, or to the common European cultural or economic heritage. The new Council of Europe recommendation aims to remedy just that. We are also often asked if resources are available. Well, according to the recommendation, teaching Roma and/or traveler history would not require additional class hours, but could be incorporated into various school subjects, such as history, civic education, social education, literature, religion, ethics, arts, music, languages, and would have limited, if any, budgetary implications. This approach was also endorsed by the European Association of History Teachers, Euroclio, who was involved in the drafting of this text. Then there are also the Council of Europe fact sheets on Roma history and the publication Right to Remember, a handbook for education with young people on the Roma genocide, issued by the Council of Europe, which can serve as background material, and they can be consulted on our website. The recommendation will also, and the implementation of the recommendation will also be promoted by the Council of Europe Strategic Action Plan for Roma and Traveler Inclusion. I would also invite you to consult the website with a database on teaching Roma Holocaust, which is a joint initiative of the Council of Europe and the Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, ODIHR, which gathers teaching material, historical research and publications, videos, documentaries, and so on. To conclude, both activities, the observatory and the recommendation, contribute to empowering Roma communities and individuals by increasing knowledge about themselves and their own history and their own culture, and thus promoting Roma identity and emancipation. They also contribute to increasing the knowledge about Roma and traveler history and culture amongst the non-Roma, thus fostering mutual understanding and dialogue. I would like to close my intervention with a quote from the declaration by the Committee of Ministers on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the Council of Europe, when they said, the ministers said, we reaffirm the importance of anti-discrimination and equality policies in a democratic society characterized by pluralism, tolerance, and broad-mindedness. Diversity is a source of enrichment to all our societies. We will continue to promote a European identity. We reaffirm our commitment to promote equal opportunities, quality education, gender equality, and good relations in society based on mutual respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. End of quote. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Afflerbach, for your remarks. The Council of Europe indeed has been at the forefront of working in this direction and trying to make sure that member states of the Council of Europe also are more inclusive of the Roma. So thank you very much for your comments. I would like to just make in my capacity as chairwoman, just to remind the speakers that since we started a little late, I would just like us to be a little bit strict on time so that we can make sure that second panel can also take place within the hours that we scheduled for this meeting. And then at second, I would like to very wholeheartedly welcome Mr. Gyula Cserei. We're very happy to have the European Commission represented in today's discussion. Mr. Gyula Cserei is head of unit of the strategy and investment at the DG for Education, Youth, Sports and Culture. Thank you so much for finding the time and joining us for this discussion. Please, Mr. Cserei, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna. Can you hear me? Is the microphone working? Thanks very much. This is really a privilege, and I know that there is no place of flattery in this kind of meetings, but I would like to just wholeheartedly congratulate you, I can see you to just pulling off this seminar on this highly important topic in these most peculiar times, which unfortunately do not allow us to meet in person, but at least we can make the best use of technology. And indeed, as you surely know, education is one of the key pillars of the new EU framework for equality, inclusion, and participation of Roma until 2030. We call it EU Roma Equip, and we're very proud of it. And we're proud of the fact that the stakeholder community, Romani organizations, have been able to vastly contribute to this strategy. And I don't want to dwell too much on the diagnosis. I'm conscious of time, as Anna reminded us, to be concise. This audience and experts here are of course well aware that Romani kids, pupils and students are lagging behind in terms of most, if not all, the important parameters. Non-enrollment, early school leaving, dropping out, and irregular attendance have been really common challenges for the many education institutions across Europe when it comes to Roma children. Significant numbers of Roma children and young people are not enrolled in schools at all for a great variety of reasons, including evident discrimination, which is oftentimes the case. And what we also see is that while schools issues are part of a wider context or broader equation, we do see that local administrations in many cases fail to properly address Roma inclusion, or they are at best reluctant to play an active role. Now, of course, we safely assume, and this was confirmed by Tima in her introduction as well, the current health crisis does have a habit or perhaps a disproportionate impact on Roma population, including children. Let me just mention the risk of digital exclusion, which is on our radar screen for Romani people and other disadvantaged or marginalized groups, that gives rise to a great deal of concern. In the European Commission, we believe that education policy and practice have a role to play in terms of the whole spectrum, I would say, including the access, opportunity, curriculum, pedagogy, critical pedagogy, teaching and learning. Livio Mattei have already referred to most of those. I have not much to add. But just to tell you what we do actually to turn the tide. By end of September, you may be aware, the Commission came forward with a rather ambitious education package that consists of a new communication on achieving the European education area, as well as a new digital education action plan. And these initiatives have inclusion at their very heart, at the core. They aim to underpin the EU equality strategies, importantly among those, the Roma equality strategy when it comes to education and training. And it is exactly in this context that the Commission will soon launch a strategic dialogue with the Member States and stakeholder community in order to identify certain enabling factors for successful digital education and take action, certainly with a special focus on connectivity gaps, equipment gaps, but also on addressing accessibility and availability of assistive technology. So this is one new initiative under the Digital Education Action Plan. We also have a new initiative under the European education area. We call it Pathways to School Success. This initiative is to help all pupils to reach a certain level, baseline level, I would even say, proficiency in basic skills and complete upper secondary education. This initiative will incorporate proposals and good practices on how to develop and promote conducive and inclusive learning environments with a strong culture of well-being, which will be beneficial for both pupils and schools. Importantly, this initiative, the Pathways to School Success, will target specifically those groups of pupils who are at most risk of underachievement and early school leaving, such as Romani children and young people. This will have, among other things, a specific focus on the local and regional level to identify schools at risk. It will also help fight bullying and violence at school, discrimination, segregation. It will also include staff support, involvement of parents, local communities, extracurricular activities in the youth field, for example. And just very briefly, the third initiative I would like to mention here is a new expert group that the Commission will launch next year, and I do hope that experts from this circle will also be able to join, because this group will help the Commission to develop proposals on strategies for creating supporting learning environment for groups at risk of underachievement and for supporting well-being at school. And this will include addressing gender-specific challenges, such as stereotypes in education and careers, as well as boys' underachievement, also bullying and sexual harassment, And we do believe that all these are very, very relevant, very pertinent issues in the context of Roma equality or emancipation, as you call it. And of course, to put flesh on the bones, if I may say so, we need investment and financial support at all levels, including at EU level. And as you know, a wealth of examples, policy guidelines, research, practical tools, and other resources, partnership with other international organizations, including OECD, Council of Europe, and others, have been produced, exchanged, and gathered in the last years. Many of them supported by the Erasmus program. And now, going forward, the Commission's intention is to make the new Erasmus program as of 2021 more inclusive. This will also allow more and better targeted support to improve national education and training systems, also to the benefit of Roma people. Again, being cautious of the time, I will stop here, and of course, happy to chat going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is brilliant, and thank you very much for sharing all of these initiatives with us. They seem like very important measures to try to tackle the challenges that we see now. Of course, we are, as always, very interested of having Roma mainstream somehow also across these initiatives and expert groups. So we would be, of course, very happy to join these discussions, and if there are opportunities for the Roma colleagues here to participate and provide input from the ground and share their expertise, we would, of course, very much appreciate such an opportunity. And speaking of expertise and experience, I'm very happy that we have today with us Mr. Recep Ali Ciupi, who is now the Executive Director of the Roma Education Fund, which is the oldest and among the most important organizations, Roma organizations, that is acting very, engaging very important actions, trying to advance the education of Roma pupils throughout Europe. So Recep, thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Respected representatives of the European Roma Institute for Arts and Culture, Romani Studies Program at the Central European University, Open Society Foundation, Council of Europe, European Commission, dear colleagues, friends, and participants of the event. It's a real pleasure for me to be on behalf of Roma Education Fund, one of the panelists to contribute to providing perspective on education and social justice for Romani communities in the post-COVID reality. In my presentation, I'll start with challenges, continue with reporting on what has been done by REF since the start of the pandemic, focus on answering the question about policies and measures that can mitigate the adverse impact of the pandemic on education, and conclude with concrete recommendations. We know from the experience that crises and challenges worldwide in many areas and sectors present the real test for any program, policy, and activity, including REF's ones. Today, more than ever, in the challenges that we face, it is good to be reminded on REF's important mission to contribute to closing the gap in educational outcomes between Roma and non-Roma by providing support to policies and programs that ensure quality education. Today we talk about education, and we see the Romani pupils have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19 measures implemented across the European countries. With the proclamation of state of emergency in many EU candidate and other European countries, education has taken a new profile, having turned to either online or remote setup, requiring flexibility of both staff and students, and specific resources to support education at distance. Proper housing, encouraging and supportive home environment, language assistance, internet, access processing technical device, as well as electricity supply, represent the minimum conditions for all children to continue their formal education. This alone has imposed great challenges for all Roma communities. For those with children in ECD, remote learning has not been available, and guided education was non-existing. For those in primary education, much of the remote learning relied highly on the parental assistance and guidance, as well as constant communication with teachers. In the secondary and tertiary education, the lack of interactions with the teachers and the non-adjusted curriculum for online teaching all presented a challenge in itself. One of the most severe challenges mentioned in the feedback from beneficiaries of our support for COVID projects are parents' capacity and pedagogical knowledge in supporting the distance learning process. 81.8% of grantees stated that this challenge is severe, along with socioeconomic conditions and exclusion. Other severe challenges identified are students and parents' psychological pressure, difficulty of learning materials through remote learning, then difficulties in accessing smart devices, lack of internet access, not enough or adequate space for studying, lack of contact with teachers and school, then poor quality curriculum and lack of stationery necessary for learning. For the Roma communities, limited internet connection and technology crucial for participation in online lessons has been constraining in overcoming these challenges. In response to the challenges Roma families and communities face since March 2020, the Roma Education Fund has created an emergency fund, an action plan to provide support to the continuation of education and learning. To assure that RF approach addresses the main educational needs in a cost-effective way by reaching as many individuals, families, and communities in need, we analyzed all possible angles. Each proposal has been based on country action plans that were developed by REF's grantees and REF staff, considering the specificity of the situation in each of the countries. The emergency activities and provision of material and educational support has been provided to Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Croatia, Hungary, Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Romania, Serbia, and Slovakia. The emergency fund, together with amounts of project reallocations approved, operates with 680,000 euros, with so far 445,000 awarded in these countries in the period March-August 2020. In this 6-month period, 3,653 packages of tablets, internet, toys, and educational materials were distributed. Over 4,693 beneficiaries supported with mentoring and tutoring, and over 1,000 families have received humanitarian aid. The main activities that REF wanted to make sure our Roma community benefited from were online reinforcement classes through mentoring and tutoring, equipment and didactic materials, parenting support programs, online platforms for community mediators, and internet packages. In addition, all countries reported on the importance of established cooperation and communication among the communities, organizations, and governments. These working relationships signed MOUs and wide networks of educational institutions have shown crucial in accomplishment of the activities in their full mode. Here, I would like specifically to mention our mentoring and tutoring approach, which highly contributes to increase students' confidence in their ability to perform, breaking down any barriers, and provides support in managing the interpersonal challenges that can deter a student's educational path to social mobility. Through this perspective, REF has built partnerships with ministries of education to support not only scholarships for students in secondary and tertiary level, but also large-scale tutoring and mentoring programs. However, there is still lots of room for improvement. Even through mentoring and tutoring are available, the attitudes and beliefs within the educational system still suppress Roma students and families' aspirations on and social mobility. Thus, the national curricula of states must represent Roma history and culture to facilitate belonging and eliminate possible stereotypes. To conclude, based on the response from REF's partners, the most important interventions to be done are still providing internet, smart devices, tutoring and mentoring as adequate educational support, and assistance in higher education enrollment and employment. When it comes to policies, reforms, and measures to mitigate the adverse impact of the pandemic on education, there is a distinct lack of cooperation with the schools and the lack of information on the needs in the field and the community. The schools and teachers should be partners, and this established communication is central in reaching out to all Roma beneficiaries and their educational needs. Mapping out the needs of the communities is a crucial step to be done in all the countries. This way, the approaches would be more tailor-made and compatible with the needs per communities in the country. Let us also not forget the importance of the parents' engagement in the education process of their children. This brings results for both. Children feel supported, safe, and guided throughout a new process, and parents take pride in being involved in their children's learning. However, for this to function, educational institutions should help in instructing them and training them on interactive learning methods. Students and mediators' engagement in the process of supporting the parents of beneficiaries during the online learning has been reported as a great motivational tool for increasing of their technological capacities as well. Specific policy introductions are needed addressing remote education and racial equal directives and equal legal frameworks. In other words, the remote education policies shall be in response and in line with the principle of equality, inclusivity, and sensitivity to minority national preferences. However, a principle that is absolutely crucial is for educational system to incorporate flexibility in their approach to education, meaning that governments and schools must be able to divert resources in a timely manner to ensure that no student gets left behind. The main goal of any reforms or policy actions should be to ensure there isn't an increase in dropout and maintaining the quality of education. Nationwide advocacy coalition building in general is needed in all countries of operation, specifically for the pandemic. As of the advocacy coalitions are operational, there needs to be targeted set of activities addressing intensified anti-Gypsyism, anti-Roma rhetoric, and scapegoating. The main aim shall be to introduce measures tackling anti-Gypsyism, especially in the frame of pandemic and crisis periods. Work is to be done on proposing policies to national governments on teacher training and online teaching methodologies sensitized to the needs of Roma students. No national coordination in the establishment and management of remote learning and poor quality curricula and lack of oversight means reducing learning outcomes and lower quality education. Mechanisms for quality control and student and teacher assessments should be placed. This will help in effectively administering classes through online methods for instructional equality and through available digital tools which would automatically increase interests and probably motivation of students to participate. As you can see, the proposed measures are many and quite diversified from the implementation to policy levels and include many stakeholders. Important point when designing policies, projects, and interventions to address the post-COVID challenges of the education, beside all what was mentioned until now, is gender. We are increasingly aiming to have approaches with gender transformative activities and to mainstream gender into all phases of our interventions. Having in mind that Roma population is quite diversified, therefore approaches, interventions, activities and results also must be diversified to reflect the reality. Finally, to emphasize the importance of participation of the public sectors and professionals, local and national institutions of governments, local NGOs and activists, international organizations, monitoring agencies, and others, educational post-COVID policies must reflect the needs of the Roma population and its internal and external diversity. This is a goal in need of a united front of organizations and would require the support of many partners and stakeholders. At the end, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting us to be part of this event and for recognizing the importance of our work in the field of education. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing all other panelists and exchanging ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Recep, for your very rich and very insightful presentation, and also congratulations on the important work that the REF has been doing over the years. We're very happy to have you as a close ally working together on the variety of issues. And last but not least, we have Ms. Gilda Horvat, the ERIAC board member, a woman of which is very inspiring and has been very important for the development of ERIAC initiatives as well. So Gilda, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Anna. First, I would like to express how impressed I am by all the positive references given today about great visionary educational approaches and projects made and operationalized mainly by Romani self-organizations, Romani people with their intellectual resources, with all their knowledge. But my approach for what I have to say here today is more rather about policy recommendations. And as I know that our time today is short, I really try to focus on this more global approach, institutional approach to policy recommendations for the topics we reference to. First one is reshaping education and pedagogic approaches means structural reforms. If we talk about educational reforms, we need to talk about structural reforms. We have been talking a lot about the brilliant content that we might provide in the future. But before we do this, we need to look at the structure in which this brilliant knowledge of our Romani people and experts is implemented. Reform the system. This reform means a visible commitment to democratic values, but not only to the values, also to those partners who strengthen those values, and consequences for those not acting according to these values. And I thank also Mr. Thomas Afflerbach a lot for referring to this point as a foremost important point beyond all strategies that we have on the very top level. There have to be the democratic values as the main system, as the main pattern that we follow, also when we want to make changes in education and also in education for Romani people. The second thing is a valid mandate for Romani institutions in policy partnerships and in policy making, resulting in departments and forums beyond a consulting status. Meaning that I really appreciate, and I'm very happy about the great progress we've made and a lot of institutions have made in the last years. But still, often it seems to me that we often have a consultory status, meaning that we are allowed to say our opinion, to give our knowledge, to give super input for policy makers. But in the end, they are considered rather than like a good advice, than something you should really follow to, meaning Romani institutions should be given the mandate to not only consult, but to really becomes to policy. Means that partnerships funding is the right way instead of short-term projects and consulting roles. Really efficient impact. We need to give them money in form of structural funds. We need to give them the security to plan not only the next 3 years, but maybe the next 5 years and maybe even the next 10 years, so that we Romani organizations can work on a long-term basis on equal eye-level partnerships instead of short-term project funding approaches. Meaning, said in a little bit demagogic way, double the funds, but much more important, double the trust, double the responsibility, and double your courage to work with us, dear policymakers. Third recommendation, strengthen the social justice on the priority set, because that's where inequality hits people hardest. The pandemic is a zoom of how social inequality hits those most who already have less than the rest. The fairness policy brief by the European Commission reports that 25% of young children miss out a quiet learning environment, ranging from 9% in Denmark to 49% in Italy. So for sure, this is not only relevant to Romani people. This goes beyond. It is about children who live in working class families, who have single parent mothers or single parent fathers, who work beyond 40 hours to make the living. So this is not only for the sake of Romani children, but for the sake of the whole next European generation. And policymakers have to follow their responsibility to ensure that educational systems are not missing the point for a necessary transformation, the transformation of policymaking, the transformation of values, and the transformation of our educational systems. And last point, very short, if you want to create innovation, you must stop repeating the patterns. If we want to make a change, it's not enough to just change one criterion in the system to really create innovation. We cannot look at the strategy Roma 2020 that is evaluated at this very second, and we will have a new strategy up to 2030 in the making now. Let's not repeat the patterns we had. Be brave to really have completely new systems built on the knowledge that we Romani institutions can provide to non-Romani institutions and to governments as partners on eye level, because we, the Romani institutions, have a lot of knowledge and information, and I'm sure we could redesign the way policies come to life in the future if you, the policymakers, led us and give us your trust, signed with budgetary commitments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gilda. And I would like to thank everybody, all of the panelists, for sharing your insights and for joining this discussion. As you know, we have a very ambitious plan of actually using your inputs and your very wise advice and recommendations and turn them into actually policy recommendations that can be then facilitated to other institutions working in the field, and especially to member states who have the competency and the mandate of implementing educational policies in European countries. So I would like to thank you again very much for being here, and we look forward to having such occasions in the future. Let's hope this is a first step in building a space for discussion and hopefully collaboration between intergovernmental organizations, national governments, hopefully, and especially Roma civil society and Roma experts in this space. So before we move to the second panel of today's symposium, we also had in mind that it's important to not only talk about the good initiatives or the positive experiences we have, but also to show them, to show a little bit of a zooming in on the work that Roma organizations have been doing in trying to advance Romani emancipation through critical pedagogy approaches, among others. So I would like to now invite all of you, those of you joining us here in the webinar and those who are following us on social media, to join us for a short break. But the break will consist of 3 short films by ERIAC, the Central European University, and the Roma Education Fund, so that you can see a little bit more closely the work that we've been doing. And we will be starting the second panel in 10 minutes. So please don't go anywhere, just enjoy. Thank you very much again.
When you dig down deeper, the mission is much more complex when you're talking about trying to change systems to be more inclusive.
The aim of the Romani Studies program is to engage scholars, policymakers and activists in debates and knowledge production on important topics for Roma communities, so that it will bring social change in our societies.
This program is really important because we are preparing Romani students who already have a BA degree from various countries, from various disciplines, to support them to get into various MAs program.
We have unprecedented number of Roma University graduates. And this is also unprecedented opportunity for us, the Roma, to have a stronger voice that will be heard at a different scale with the national governments, within academia, within media, and that people will be ready to get into public and political life in a different way than generations before us.
Besides the academic preparation that we are taking, we are also taking Romani language, and also we have a course designed for Romani identity and leadership.
The skills that I had a chance to acquire during the Roma graduate preparatory program, now I can indeed utilize. I can indeed use them through my job, which is advocacy and being an advocacy and policy officer at the Roma Education Fund.
We already see the impact of the program, because students which studied here at CEU joined existing organizations, and they are making arguments sharper, the vision more clear, and they are making messages that resonate differently within the civil society and within the public and political space.
Student has an experience to interact with the future elite, because CEU is still the center of Central Europe, actually, who are educating the future social, political, and cultural elite.
For us, it's really important that those that go through this program and later on will get good degrees, that they will be very good professionals, but on the other hand, they will not deny their ethnicity, their ethnic belonging. That's key for the social inclusion of Roma.
We are not just educating the Roma elite, but also we are creating a Roma elite who has a sense of social responsibility as well.
Coming from a community from the south of Romania, I feel very close to my people, and I also feel very much responsible to offer back. And I think CEU is the best place where I can develop myself and do what actually I want to do.
We are also offering, with the support of our donors, full scholarships to all those selected in this program. If we want to bring social change and to improve the situation of Roma communities, we do have to invest in those able to lead institutions, ideas, and people to bring the social change.
We want to support those who belong to the Roma communities and are ready to benefit from the potential of the CEU and the enormous academic resource, but deploy this knowledge in raising the voice, raising the concerns, and having more impact on the decisions that are made on behalf of the Roma. Today, those decisions are mostly detrimental, and the way to shift that is that we have a group of people, much larger group of people, that will work in the future for many years with different equipment, and this equipment is the knowledge that we hope they will gain at the CEU.
If you are also a Roma individual who is wishing to achieve your dreams, this is the time to apply for the Roma Graduate Preparatory Program at the Central European University.
The outbreak of COVID-19 made visible not only the unequal access to education by Roma pupils due to the lack of hardware, difficulties in accessing online classes, and poor quality of education. The pandemic also demonstrated a lack of access to reliable and quality educational resources on Roma arts and culture.
Lack of knowledge of European and national histories of Roma cultural history, and Roma arts and culture place Roma cultural heritage at risk of disappearance.
At the same time, the rise of misinformation about Roma, as well as the misrepresentation of Roma communities, requires an authentic response through the production and dissemination of reliable information about the Roma.
The recent resolution of the Council of Europe recommending the inclusion of the history of Roma and travelers in school curricula and teaching materials gives new momentum on the long road to making Roma history and culture widely known and accepted as an integral part of European history and its cultural landscape.
As countries begin developing teaching materials for formal education, there is a need for reliable and accurate educational resources that can lay the foundation for an international canon of knowledge about Roma. Knowledge that is both scientifically rigorous and developed from within the Roma perspective.
This is why, in response to the requests of Roma membership, as well as the broad need for fair and widely accessible knowledge about Roma,
we are proud to announce that we are establishing the Barva Lipe Roma Online University.
Barva Lipe University is called to life in the framework of the Roma Cultural History Initiative, the international outreach project supported by the Federal Foreign Office of Germany. ERIAC is developing the Roma cultural curriculum in partnership with the Romani Studies program of the Central European University.
The Barva Lipe Roma Online University will compensate for lack of inclusion of Roma in formal school curricula and at the same time instill pride, solidarity and inspiration among the Roma.
The Roma Online University will be inaugurated with the first course, Introduction to Roma Cultural History, for which we have assembled a team of leading Roma historians, arts and culture experts, and scholars to design a comprehensive curriculum.
Thematized curriculum will be made accessible to all audiences, both Roma and non-Roma alike.
And we hope that will become the foundation for Roma arts and culture educational canon.
Join us online
to celebrate Roma identities,
histories, and cultures.
Okay, welcome back everybody. My name is Márton Rövid. I am visiting professor at the Romani Studies program of Central European University, and I would like to invite members of the second panel to join the discussion. And in this panel, we are going to assess Roma education initiatives from the perspective of critical pedagogy. And first, as an introduction, I would just like to express and highlight how important it is, the collaboration of these two very young institutions. Actually, both the European Roma Institute for Arts and Cultures and the Romani Studies program at CU were founded in 2017, and they have a very special mission, which is not only doing academic research, but also contributing to the emancipation of Romani populations. So I think that's why this symposium is of high importance for us. And we wanted to address two specific questions in this panel, namely to discuss what kind of educational reforms and initiatives contribute to Romani emancipation, and what kind of educational measures and institutions can undermine such efforts. And secondly, we want to see to what extent these specific initiatives that were discussed also in the first panel challenge actually mainstream neoliberal educational systems. And I would like to introduce the members of our panel. The first speaker will be Dr. Marius Taba, who is a sociologist and affiliated with the Corvinus University of Budapest. He has extensive knowledge in Roma education. He worked for many, many years for Roma Education Fund, and he has been doing research on Roma education for several years. The second speaker is Emiliano Ariu, who is the Executive Director of Roma Verzitas Albania. And last but not least, we will have Dr. Angela Koci, who is the chair of the Romani Studies program at Central European University. We are a bit late on time, so I would like to ask you to limit yourself to roughly 10 minutes contributions. Marius, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well.
First of all, I would like to thank to the organizers for inviting me for such an important topic. It is the first time when I got the invitation of European Institute for Roma Arts and Culture. And all the time I will be happy to answer to the invitation of CU Romani Studies. The questions that you raised today, I think they are very important, and today I will try to look a little bit of the concept of Roma school segregation, because what we are having today during the pandemic or during the crisis is just the naked reality. It's not an effect of a crisis of a couple of months or a year by now. However, to understand this, we have to operationalize a couple of concepts and to look historically at the basic philosophy of Roma education. And in regard with your first question, what kind of educational reforms and initiatives contribute to Romani emancipation, and what kind of educational measures and institutions undermine such efforts? And I think to reflect on that, we have to go a century back. Will look a little bit strange, but you will see why. We have to look at the debate of the W. Ebb Du Bois and T. Booth Washington. In America, it was this debate 120 years ago, what to do and what are the educational policies that will push the integration of Afro-Americans. And one option, it was to fully indulge the educational system from primary to tertiary level. And this was the vision of Webb Du Bois, why Booker T. Washington look at the aspect of what it's called today kind of, I will call it utilitarian part of education. And his idea was that Roma needs the basic skills and basic literacy in order to cope with the living nearby the white people, and it's sufficient for the Afro-Americans to have basic education in order to serve and to continue the undeserved jobs. This was on the American continent. However, we have to come back here in Europe and see that in the same time, the same question was raised for the education of Roma. How and who said this in Europe? Mainly it was the eugenists. And the eugenists, they look at the education of Roma either to the integration lens, and it was how to make them good citizens, how will make them to contribute to the nation and to the economic perspective. And the other part of the eugenist, it was how to extinguish the Roma and how the policy of what was called the racial politics that ended up with the Holocaust. So we had there the policies of sterilization of Roma, and the other mildly, with a quotation mark, policy, it was to put Roma either into a special education, into the boarding school, or to educate them and to make them citizen and civilized. So if we look at this concept, we will understand that this debate, it's not new and it's not valid just now in the time of a crisis, but rather we have to have a historical understanding of it. Further on, some critics are saying how the Roma couldn't cope with the socialist policies of integration after the Second World War. And here, I wanted to answer them with an empirical answer, but also with some evidences. The continuation of educational policies of Roma after the Second World War were mainly led by the guys that projected and made the social engineering of integrated Roma through the different type of schooling. However, into the socialist times, the specialists, they were looking at what was called integration and sedentarization of Roma, and they were continuing to put them into the schools that at a certain point give them just the basic skills and the graduation of basic education to be attracted to the socialist economy. And I'm thinking here to give you examples of the special schools from former Czechoslovakia, where they are called practical schools or practitioner schools in their language, which their curricula and aim, it was specifically to do this. Another example is the integration policies from Bulgaria, and later on I would elaborate a little bit more. But the same pattern, it was to establish the so-called Mahala schools, where Roma were given with the basic education and with the basic schools to be attracted into the socialist factory. So as we can see, all the education policies were mainly driven by the state, and all of them with the aim of utilitarian purposes and utilitarian vision, how to make Roma citizen, but not enough citizen, as we will see later on. So this is the way where we have to discuss about the school segregation. So it's a state-led policy, and it's not a social policy of self-segregation of Roma. I will do a parenthesis because the debate between the Dubois and Books T. Washington, among our Roma, our days, still some of our Roma leaders are wondering if the segregated school is helping or not the Roma identity and Roma politics of the identity. But coming back to the state-led policy, I just heard the representative of the European Commission, Mr. Gyula Mr. Gyula Cherry, where in the current planning of the Commission, of the European Commission, it's still kind of a utilitarian part of policy design, mainly the Roma to get basic skills and to reach the completion of secondary school. For my friends that are studying the public policy, I think this is embedded in what it's called the garbage can theory. And I will stop here. But later on, what happened and why we will need to debate about the critical pedagogy. Critical pedagogy, it's coming in the 70s with the greatest book of Paulo Freire, The Pedagogy of Oppressed. Here, it's actually the change into leading the mainstream levers and actually putting the accent on the community view and community perspective of the education. So up to a book, The Pedagogy of Oppressed in the 68 of Freire, all the integration of oppressed, all the integration of racialized group, it was mainly driven by the state and how the citizens will serve in a way or another the state. In the critical pedagogy, we have the lens of community. And here it's the first time when this switch is bringing into the discussion that education, that literacy of children and young adults, actually it's bringing a new level of liberation. So here it is we to debate in the new planning and policy about Roma education, how and what are the roles of the community into the educational process. How we will embed these values, this part of the identity into the educational policy. And I think that it's for us very important to discuss and to have a conversation about the school segregation. Is not because it's my fetish and I was writing in the last 15 years about it, but actually the last report of Fundamental Rights Agency from 2018, it's showing us that on average at the level of European Union, the school segregation of Roma, it increased from average 10% to 15%. So what we are having now during the pandemic, it's actually a result of a historical approach towards the Roma education in access to the online learning and teaching. It was documented 20 years ago when we demonstrated that actually the segregated schools are less equipped. The segregated schools, they have less trained teachers, that the segregated schools are labeled, and the curricula that it's there, it's planned and projected to give the basic skills and literacy for Roma, but not with the hope to continue with further education like secondary and tertiary. It's important for us to remember, and now I will talk about the policy approach towards the segregation, and I will start with the failures. So first of all, we do have now 3 countries under the infringement because of the decision of the European Court of Human Rights demonstrating the discrimination and the school segregation in 3 countries. And we are talking now about Hungary, Czech Republic, and Slovakia. Romania, it's also on the way to get infringed. So we do have some successes into the approaches of litigation and demonstrating the school segregation, but we miss to grow up and to actually document the policies that has been implemented to tackle the real segregation at the community level. And here it's coming in my mind 2 examples from Bulgaria. One is the so-called busing system that started in Vidin and extended 6-7 years ago, roughly to 15 communities, where they started to create kind of a community, and this is what I'm highlighting and what it's actually in line with the critical pedagogy. They created some community hubs. Everybody, they look at how expensive it was the gas to commute the people from the segregated school to integrated school, but actually they neglected what has been created there as a community hub, as a practices, as a community mobilization, the role of school mediators, the role of the NGO, and all the other social and economic mechanisms that was created around the so-called busing system into the Bulgarian community. And all this was stopped because of econometrics of some people saying that the gas is too expensive to continue the process, that the process is not efficient. But we lost actually a model that could be improved, a model that was there. How was closed, and where the state intervened and saw that what we as activists and scholars, we didn't see. In one day, the general prosecutor of Bulgaria, he took all the documents of the so-called desegregators from Bulgaria, And for 2 years, they were under the trail. No single one was found guilty. All of them were innocent. But what was the social impact? It was that they stopped literally the desegregation process in more than 15 localities in Bulgaria. So to me, I think we have to reflect on school desegregation and to revisit the model that it's called busing the children. The second model, it's the model that actually we nurture, and we understood another thing. Who's the segregator? The state is segregated. Yeah, we have evidences, and historically we already talk about this. We had a model in the neighborhood of Istok in Bulgaria, where the mayor, with the political interest or not, understood the benefits of desegregating the school. And there, with the same model, busing thing, it seems that it was more efficient. Why? Because the institution itself somehow realized that desegregation, it can bring added value to the economy, to the social exchange and social interaction between Roma and non-Roma. So we have two models, but both of them are abandoned because some people are looking from the lens of econometrics. We have to look at the real driving forces of desegregation and to revisit the racialization part of the desegregation, and not to see it as a simple social process, or as some critics of segregation are calling the self-segregation of Roma. To conclude, I think that the liberal acceptance of multiculturalism for the contemporary living, the use of culture and the use of identity when we talk about the desegregation, it has a lot to add. But without triangulating with the concept of race and racialization, it doesn't create a cycle and a conceptualization of a human difference. Yes, I do acknowledge, and actually I was one of the initiators of the project, that it's endorsed by the Council of Europe, with representation of Roma into the school books, together with the Roma Education Fund and Gerd Herbert Institute from Germany. Yeah, that's one way. But how we will do and how we will revisit the negotiation with the state institution and their way of racializing the Roma into the school, that mainly it's producing what we are calling today school segregation, a phenomenon that it's daily and daily increasing.
Thank you, Marius, for this very important presentation. And I think it was really crucial to provide a historical overview and to provide the context of what we are talking about this in this symposium. And also, I really appreciate your contribution about school segregation and the two concrete examples. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Emiliano Ariu from Albania. And I think now we will go to a very concrete case. And I think we can learn a lot from the examples of Roma Versitas institutions. You know that Roma Versitas institutions exist in several countries, and they are trying to tackle also and reform the higher education systems in different countries. So I'm very much looking forward to your speech. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin, and I want to thank also the organizer for inviting me on this topics. Instead, we listened from all the speakers. I think I will bring another level, not on the implementation of Roma Versitas successful program, but most what the governments can do about the education of Roma children and Roma students in in this new area, let's say, and let's say also in the situation that we are crossing all the world about COVID-19. But I want to turn back in the 19th when Albania was under the communism regime, where the 8 years class education was compulsory and over 90% of Roma children attended it. And from that 90%, 30 to 40% of them were successfully enrolled into secondary education, and very small part of it into tertiary education. But you know, like any parts and then any countries after the communism regime, the transition destabilized the roots of education for the Roma families, because many of them began to immigrate in the neighbor countries and to immigrate within the country. As a result, we have a high number of abandonments of the education in all levels by Roma children. Although until 2009, significant reports with segregated data do not exist. We do not have reports with the data analysis on the national level. We only have them, and still from civil societies. We have presented superficial statistical data. There are no detailed and full data in the civil register though, due to reason of non-registration, procedures, or abandonment of their residence location of the Roma families. I presented this information to let you know that even nowadays, the system changed and we have 9 years class education is also compulsory. We have social workers in municipality who are not prepared enough to cope with Roma families and to provide supports to parents to register their children in preschool or elementary. The reason I mentioned social workers is because they are the ones who have access to civil registries and to see which child reached the age to enroll in primary education. In the local level, there isn't made till now any attempt at all, and many times they are asking the help of civil society in order to push the parents towards this goal. Slightly abstract, when local government has the human, financial, and legal power to do so. Let's make a statistical comparison of data 2019-2020, presented by the government within the Ministry of Health and Social Protection. They say that concrete efforts have been made in enrolling children in early childhood care on education, as well as in re-evaluating education programs in kindergarten and schools. As such, 40,000 or almost 400 more Roma and Egyptian children are enrolled in and participated in preschool and compulsory education during 2019. Efforts at the municipality level to exclude Roma children from paying for enrollment in preschool education are particularly acute in some municipalities. 745 Roma and Egyptian children were exempted from dormitory fees in preschool education during 2019 versus 648 reported in 2018. But again, this number is small compared to the target that the ministry has to achieve. Also, related to this, they add that lack of childcare infrastructure appears to be a significant barrier to preschool enrollment among Roma. Improved childcare services and communication with the most vulnerable Roma families can help enroll children in the preschool system. Support for Roma mothers can improve, they say, children's access to preschool and basic education. Preschool textbooks and necessary didactic materials, unless provided for Roma children, impede their attendance. 1,375 Roma and Egyptians have benefited from homework and assistant study during 2019. Sorry, but this is data presented by the organization who are supporting all this category of Roma children with mentoring and tutoring by implementing different projects. Free textbooks are provided to 10,994 Roma and Egyptian children. Although measures have been taken with free textbook in recent years, it's noticed that mostly served for those children whose parents aimed on their education. That means that the free textbooks measures do not increase or decrease the school dropout. This leads on thinking that this kind of policy is not enough. A new policies should be taken, and there is the need to be created ad hoc department to deal with this phenomena. More than 200 families are referred to the social protection services or other sources to prevent the dropout of school of their children during 2019. In compulsory education, the increased number of school dropouts is due to emigration family or attraction to gray labor market, especially among early teens. Provided employment opportunities for parents can minimize Roma children drop out of schools. So you look, they are giving data, they are giving even recommendation, but not implementation. Improving information from mediators can affect Roma children attending school. Distance from schools along with a lack of safe travel and transportation is a barrier to Roma children attending, especially girls. So we have, but mediators, like I pronounced it even above, is the social worker, is the municipality level, the regional education directorate that has to deal with these main issues. One thing stands out in this report presented by the government. For 2 years, this data has been shown separated from Roma and Egyptian, but recently they are presented as a whole, Roma and Egyptians. For those of us who have been to the presentation of these reports and read them, could notice that it is more positive for the state to present such a number, including both minorities. I'm saying both minorities because due to the law of the minorities, Roma and Egyptian are separated minorities. But what is overlooked and for which no action was provided is that in those numbers presented, Roma children are many times smaller in comparison to the other minority. So, a summary so far in terms of 9-year education. We do not have intervention of social workers at the local level. We do not have parenting policies. We do not have enough infrastructure for Roma children in kindergartens. We do not have accurate data, which leads to data manipulation and inadequate problem-solving measures. We do not have concrete measures for preventing the dropouts. Here it is worth to be mentioned that out of 100%, let's say, of those who start the 9-year schools, 45% of them drop out in the 3rd and 4th grades, and 35% remaining in 5th and 6th grades. So we have only 20% that will finish from that 100, the 9-year schools. And the list of this summary is that we do not have scholarships or incentive programs for Roma pupils or even secondary education. I focused more on this part because here begins the real challenge of education. Here begins the differentiation of visible results of education attainment for Roma children. Here are the policy achievements that the state undertakes against this phenomenon. They seem obvious that as in high school, a small number manage to attend it. Even if we say that out of 1,000 students who finish the 9th grade, 20% of them manage to enroll in high school, which is approximately 200 students. But from what we have seen so far in Roma Versitas that are now researchers and the project implementation is that the number is approaching, but never close to it. So we have an 80% of children belonging to the age of 14 to 80 years old outside the education system and without a clear plan for their future. In fact, in these parts, we have noticed that is needed more support because we are dealing with a delicate age group. We also have the obstacle that still remain among Roma families, like early marriages. But let me point on that. Has been observed in many cases that if the child managed to attend the secondary education, he has managed to avoid the premature wedding. These numbers are still falling in the tertiary education. Recently, these last 3 years, the registration procedures and the GPA criteria played the main role. In fact, the primary role for the exclusion is the average, where in fact it varies by increasing year to year. Enrollment policy, as in filling out the university form, because this is the system and the procedures to enroll in university, you, who is applying the students, don't know in which one you will be chosen, in which from the 3 to 5 branch selected you choose and in which city. Since the public university are not able to accept all students, here it comes the private university. As you may know, the fees of higher education are tremendous and not affordable for Roma students. Even though the private university have previously provided full scholarship, with the recent changes, they can only give 50 to 70% discounts about the tuition fee. But that still remain an unaffordable amount for almost everyone. The only hope for Roma students continuing the branch they wanted is the support of RMUSP scholarship from Roma Education Fund. And let me point it on that, not because we are Roma Versitas and are supported by Roma Education Fund, but the only foundation that are still supporting the education in Albania is Roma Education Fund. The rest who cannot afford it try to apply on the second or third round in order to enroll in public university, where the only good policy till now remain the exclusion of tuition fees. I'm saying again, is in the public university. And it also changed from university to university because they are independent on management. In 2040 and 2080, at the national level, the number of students in bachelor and master has been over 120. Recently, as a result for the application policies, this number has decreased, which makes us to currently have 10 to 50 new enrolled from secondary to tertiary and 35 to 40 that are ongoing, about let's say 60 students in total. By presenting this picture, we can suggest that the role of social worker needs to be restructured. The role of the regional education offices should be reconsidered. The role of the mediator and supporter for Roma families in relation to the registration of children who have reached the age of the education has to be integrated into the regional education offices. The role of school psychologists should be taken seriously in relation to the psychological support of Roma children. In parallel, the local social support offices and the regional education offices should cooperate, finding case-by-case solution for families who have economic issues and who have school-age children or are attending it. Supportive policies should be provided for those children enrolled in secondary education, as well as for those who continue their vocational education. Current policies should be implemented in time. The policies undertaken should be carefully analyzed and extended in the long run. The same goes for the project and programs implemented by civil society. Long-term and timely programs should be supported, as only in this way can the required results be achieved. I'm closing that, but the education has been, is, and will remain primary for the elimination of some of the major problems that our community is still facing internationally. And most of them, actually, we are under COVID-19 and we are going on online education. And I don't want to mention because most of them were mentioned by the previous panelists. So thank you again, Martin, and thank you for this opportunity to represent this kind of picture of the education system and the situation in Albania.
Thank you, Emiliano. I think your presentation was very, very relevant also beyond Albania, and you pointed out crucial challenges, and we also appreciate the recommendations at the end which we formulated and which we would like to collect and publish in a policy brief. Before I introduce you to Angela Kotze, I would like to highlight that we appreciate the questions we receive on Facebook. We would like to tackle some of them, but we are running a bit late with time. And also we will have a final closing words by Julius Rostas, but first I would like to give the floor to Angela Kotze.
Thank you, Marton. I think I'm going to be really brief because we are really out of time, but I would like to underscore that it was so important, which was raised by Marius as well as Emiliano. So I think it was really worthy to listen you, even though that you went over time, because it's so important and so relevant. And Actually, I'm going to be really short. I just would like to go back to the critical pedagogy, because I think somehow we miss that point, that why we are come together as a panel, that critical pedagogy, how it could be important and how it could be instrumentalized to dismantling structural racism. I would like to quote a little bit Henry Giraud, who was a follower of Paulo Freire, and he wrote, so I'm quoting him, critical pedagogy, it views teaching as an inherently political act, reject the neutrality of knowledge, and insist that issue of social justice and democracy itself are not distinct from acts of teaching and learning. And why I'm quoted this and why I brought this issue of critical pedagogy, because we are actually teaching and learning in a very politicized institutional system, which is called education. And as we know that schooling reproduce certain deep-seated ways of understanding and perceiving that allows subordinated groups to be reproduced and the dominant group to maintain its status without resorting to physical representation or coercion. They call the deep-seated ways of perceiving and understanding and develop in this process the habitus. That was actually written by a person who's called Fuyu Shimomura, who was contemplating about can critical race pedagogy in fact break through perpetual of racial inequality, and he explored that what is behind structural racism and potential intervention. And I think it's really important because educational system, if we go back to some theoretical foundation, it's really construct of knowledge, produce of knowledge, right? Which is perpetuated by various educational levels, even from the elementary till via high school and universities as well. It's a kind of cultural reproduction, right? And the cultural reproduction which legitimize structural inequality. And why we are here, because basically all kinds of initiatives, what we started as Roma Versitas or the RGPP, the Roma Graduate Education Program, or the Tanoda program in Hungary, which provides some kind of afternoon school support for Romani kids who are in the elementary and high school. It's somehow rectifying structural injustice and structural inequalities. And if we want to dismantle structural inequality, we have to change the content of the education, which basically questioning the racist biases and questioning the normalized racialization, which has been produced through centuries in the educational system. And we have to have some Romani faces as well. So the representation is very important, but it's important that what kind of knowledge can be produced and who are these people who can produce a quality knowledge. And, I just had a discussion a couple of weeks ago with someone from the European Parliament who was pressing the button that equality, Roma should be equality. Absolutely, we are totally agree with that. I think there is a consensus on that. But how can we achieve that? Who can actually articulate in such a rigorous way, in such a sharp way, as it's going to be acceptable? It's going to be policy, it's going to be legislation, it's going to be a political act. So we need people. And basically that's what Roma graduate preparations are doing, as well as Roma Versitas, who maybe some of you don't know, but in Hungary, I was the one who developed this concept and distributed in various member states with the help of the Open Society Foundation, the International Policy Fellowship. And we need people who are coming out from university. And I would like to just refer back to one statistics actually, which is quite telling. It's coming from the Fundamental Rights Agency report from 2018. And they are saying that only 15% of those Romani adults aged between 2024 who were actually complemented high school, who completed high school, who has a high school degree. So can you imagine? So only 15%, and if we would compare with the non-Roma population, the disparities would be enormous. So it's only 1% per country, or even less than 1% who can graduate from universities. So we are still very tiny, very fragile. And if we want to create an educational pipeline, we have to think about early childhood education, elementary school education, high school education, and university education, right? So creating an educational pipeline for Roma, it's a huge investment in a monetary term, as well as in terms of human resources. But it's a big return. It's a huge return, and we just can't continue the business as usual after COVID. And we have to rethink where we can invest money and how can we change the structure, joining to Gilda, that we had enough project, we had enough, pilot projects. No, we want to see some kind of structural changes as well. So that's why critical pedagogy is so important, because questioning the legitimacy and the ideology of structural inequality. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, so much. And closing this panel, we would like to respond to some of the excellent questions we received on Facebook. And we already divided up a bit the questions. So we had one question from Marco Pecak on what we mean by emancipation and education. And Marius Taba volunteered to respond to that. We had also another excellent question by Bledi Taho on parental education, and another one by Marco Stenros on factors that motivate Roma for better education. I would like to ask you to respond to this briefly, and then we would give the floor for the closing remarks. Marius, please. Maybe the connection. You are here, Marius. Maybe Emiliano, you could go then first.
Okay, thank you, Martin. I want to answer first.
Hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Emiliano. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay. I want to answer first of the question by Marcus Tangras, factors that motivate Roma for better education. We have a lot of them. One of them is Central European University and its programs. And it's a good achievement because it's in base of meritocracy and it's like recruiting new intellectual Roma for the future. That is the best one. Okay, so this is the first, because I want to be short. About the Bledi from Albania for the parental education, I mentioned it even in my presentation. We lack on that direction. That is the most crucial part, because it is by the research seen that the families, the children that have parents educated in one of the university, they even will be educated in the other university. So who has children, parents that are educated, even the children became educated. I think we should work closely to the government in the new policies. I should use the pressure from the European institutions, because it is needed. And most of the time, not to be only policies on the table, but to be implemented on achieving this kind of proposal. I think I was just short, Martin, so it's all.
Thank you very much, Marius.
Thank you very much, Marco Pecak, for your question. Actually, I don't know what is emancipation, but I know what shouldn't be emancipation. Because emancipation and the standard of civilization and being good citizen, usually it's given and defined by the whites. This is actually the basic mechanism of discrimination, saying you are not enough educated and they exclude you. You are not enough civilized and they exclude you. And they impose the standards that you can cope with or not. So if it's now to define what is Roma emancipation, it's to be defined by the Roma community, and the answer, it is with the definition of Paulo Freire first, that the community mobilization, the community awakening is the first step to emancipation. I know, for instance, from Homi Baba, what it's not emancipation. It's that what some institutions are doing today, they want you to be black, to color the picture there, but they want to be in spirit, in mind, in knowledge and behavior like them to fit to the institutional setup. So this is not emancipation. The emancipation, it's right to self-determination. The emancipation wouldn't be needed if the institutions and academia and the schools and every single organization will be inclusive and will find the means of accepting people and helping them to reach their best potential in life. So this is the emancipation. Otherwise, if we take the white people definitions, they will increase it and they will put concepts and they will put criteria that we will never reach. Just think that we are just at the first generation of being diplomats. So they have at least 5 generations in front of us. So the emancipation through the diplomacy, we need another 5 generations to reach the level, understanding the social networking and also the access to the power mechanism to talk on the same diplomatic way like the whites. Is this an emancipation? No.
Thank you, Marius. And I feel that we are opening up very important questions, and I hope that this symposium could contribute to shedding a new light to Roma education initiatives. I think in the first panel, we learned about very important initiatives of the Council of Europe and the European Union. And we also heard critical remarks, and I think in the second panel, we could have a more broader critical overview of these initiatives. I would like to invite for closing remarks Julius Rostás, who played a very important role that we could be here. He was also crucial in founding both the European Roma Institutes for Arts and Culture and the Romani Studies program at Central European University. So I would like to invite you, Julius, to make some closing words.
Thank you very much, Marton. I'd like first to congratulate the European Roma Institute for Arts and Culture and the EU Romani Studies program for organizing such an important event. And it's important because of the topic first that it discussed. It's also important because important players came to the table to discuss this topic. And also it's important because we can take stock of what has been done so far. So let me, in the end, also in an optimistic way, put a little bit in the context the discussion that was organized today here in this panel. Yes, we do need critical pedagogy, because for too long in our history, education was a tool of oppressing Roma, was a tool, a mean of social control and assimilation of Roma. So something has to change, and it's high time to do that. Of course, we need 4 things to be able to bring social change into our societies, to create more egalitarian societies, and where social justice and diversity are values that guide the public governance. Therefore, we need the following. We need human resources. And I was glad to hear about the increasing role of Roma accessing higher education, but also about the increasing number of Roma doing PhDs, and why not becoming, assuming teaching positions in universities. Then, of course, we need infrastructure. And the fact that these two institutions today, that I proudly I am still associated with them, organize such a debate, shows how important the infrastructure and the fact that we have platforms to advance our ideas are important. There are a few journals interested in Romani studies, and there is also much more to be done. But this is still an important development. Then, of course, we need a body of knowledge, because it's not enough just to have more Roma students, but also what we teach them, and also the non-Roma students. What kind of values we promote through our teaching. And of course, we have to challenge what has been done so far, if we want to bring social change into our societies. But then we also need the practice. We need to act accordingly and to interact, to stimulate dialogue, and to put in practice those values that we stand for. And I think today's discussion was a very good example of that. So I hope the audience enjoyed it, and we all have time to reflect on what was discussed here. I think this was an important event, and I look forward to future similar events organized by, why not, other institutions as well. Thank you very much.